Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all having a wonderful GDC. Thank you for showing up after what was most assuredly an excitingly late night after the Gang Awards. Congratulations to everyone that won, and congratulations to those of you that woke up. So, sorry. Today, this is relative perfection, finding the balance between flawed and flawless, or as I like to call it, how I learned to stop worrying and embrace imperfection. As you can see, an example of finding the balance right there. Maybe not. Today, we have a fantastic panel before you. I'd like to introduce Neil McCree. Neil, would you like to say something about yourself?
I try not to say too much about myself. No, I'm a independent composer who's worked on Overwatch, World of Warcraft, Diablo, some independent games as well. I have a background in film and television, and that's about it.
Fantastic. Our next panelist is Penka Kuneva.
Good morning. I compose music for mobile games, VR, and I have the distinct honor to orchestrate for Neil McCree on his Blizzard projects.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Our next panelist, the esteemed Guy Whitmore.
Hi, a music designer, composer, freelance, but I've been freelance 3 times. I've worked with full-time at Microsoft, EA, Monolith, and others. Yeah, fun games that I've worked on. So.
And our fourth panelist, oh boy, something's wrong. What? Oh, it's Austin Wintory. Oh wait, no, it's not Austin Wintory, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, he had to go back to Los Angeles because something very exciting came up, which is very exciting, but I obviously cannot talk about. We have a message from him, though, in the spirit of true imperfection.
Hello. For the shrewd observer, you will notice I am not sitting on the panel right in front of you, because in the spirit of embracing imperfection, I can't come and am shooting a crappy, on-the-street GDC mid-conference greeting. I had to leave rather unexpectedly to get back to take care of some work emergency situations, and so forgive me for not coming. You're definitely in good hands, and so as a way to begin the process of loving imperfection, I give you this terribly made, unrehearsed, not remotely polished video. And with that, I leave you in my friends' and colleagues' hands. Thank you, and sorry I couldn't make it.
It went on for that, like 3 more minutes. I cut it. Anyway. And I am your moderator, John Harper Metz. I've worked on a few games in the past. Very honored to be honored by Gang a couple times. And you don't need to know about me, because this isn't about me. This is about us, really. So let's kick off with a question. What is perfection, really, right? The dictionary defines perfection as the condition, state, or quality of being free, or as free as possible from all flaws or defects, or the action or process of improving something until it is faultless or as faultless as possible. That's a little interesting. So, what is perfection to you? And really, can it really exist in an art form like that which we practice? So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists here. Neil, you want to start?
Sure. Do I need to turn this towards me? So perfection to me is something that to the listener, and it is subjective to each listener, might find one thing to be perfect, another person might see the flaws in it, but I definitely believe it exists. There are, film scores that I grew up with, like the movie Legends of the Fall to me it's a perfect score to me. There's utterly flawless. I wouldn't change a single note. There are things I've done that were, as close to perfection as I was able to get. But underneath the hood, I look back and there, those very things that I brought as close to perfection as I could, there was a lot of chaos that happened leading up to it. There were a lot of things that almost didn't happen. There was a lot of, a lot of things that I wish I could have done at the time, but looking back, somehow it all, time, polishes it, and it all seems to have worked out just right. But I definitely believe that perfection exists, although it does change over time, our perception of what is perfect. You might think something's perfect when you're younger. When you're older, you look back on it and you see the flaws. And, it's fascinating.
Thank you. Or Guy?
Yeah, to take up on where Neil left off, for me, perfection starts as an ideal, right? You have this ideal of what something could be or should sound like, etc. And it's not something that's literally heard. It's more of an emotional guide. I call it my North Star. Where am I headed? Where do I really want to attain, with the listener, that's going to hear this music? And that's a little different than flawless, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But what state of being do you want to create in others? That's the ultimate perfection, no matter how it's achieved. So there's not one perfect. I don't think actual physical perfection is possible, and that's where this quagmire kind of comes up. So to know that, in my opinion, absolute perfection is unattainable, but still to kind of go for it. I think that's there's a wisdom in that. So, I think it gets us anxious when we don't, when we think we have to actually attain absolute perfection.
Thank you.
And I think of perfection as mastery of the craft. That basically means having evolved skills as a composer in terms of harmony, melody, form. And I also transitioned from film into games, and I became extremely passionate about the game scores because, in addition to mastery of the craft, I also saw incredible imagination. The game scores are very imaginative, very curious, and that sort of intellectually curious approach is interesting to me. On another hand, I'm always incredibly impressed, and to me this is perfection, when the emotional scope is broad and really stirring. Guys, all of you should check out Battle for Azeroth from Blizzard, from World of Warcraft that Neil scored. This music makes me cry every time, and I've heard it probably 50 times, maybe 100 times. And finally, as game composers, when we compose a score for a game, we have to strive that that score is perfect for the game it accompanies. And that's a whole different conversation, but that perfection basically is the score being the perfect match for what the game is doing.
And so I have a series of little entries from Austin, and some of these are pretty darn cool. But in his opinion, basically, he says, he agrees with pretty much everyone else here has to say, but actual perfection would be immensely boring. Happy accidents that arise from imperfection are what characterize finished products that are often, in deeply meaningful and human ways. And he says, I don't just mean charming artifacts, but the things that remind us that we are, fallible, that fallible fellow human beings came together and did something now and we're all sharing in it. Perfection also often becomes synonymous with robotic and sterile and removes that essential humanity. So when is perfection not practical? I.e., how much imperfection is acceptable? Should we start again at that?
Sure. One of the main times perfection is not really practical is if you're in a orchestra type setting, a recording setting where you're paying for quality, you're paying for time. It can be very expensive to try to get the perfect take. So oftentimes going into a session, it's a good idea to plan to have some, be able to separate elements, do stems, record long strings and short strings separately so you can come back later and edit them to perfection. Not robotic perfection, but to a state where it sounds like you had a lot more time to work on it. Because realistically, you don't always have time to get take after take after take to perfection. Sometimes you might just get one take, and you plan ahead in the way you can come back later and perfect it after the fact.
For me, perfection, of which I'm very much a card-carrying member, goes awry when we mistake perfect with flawless. It's a little bit what Austin was saying. It's easy to get to a point where a piece is conveying your ideas really well, and we actually have some time left. So we keep we line up our beats a little better. We make our strings more in tune. We do all this stuff, and you realize maybe I ironed out some of the awesomeness. So what is perfect isn't always just what is technically perfect, right? And it's, keeping your eye on that North Star of that initial idea of what emotional impact, not your necessarily music perfection note to note, but emotional impact is more important, in my opinion, so that you don't kind of genericize your art, your music.
I wanted to mention something. Earlier in my career, I was scoring monster movies for the Sci-Fi Channel, and I was kind of really focused on adding subtlety in the texture, like maybe some buzzing samples or kind of really super subtle tremolos. And instead of focusing on the big set pieces like the theme or the last reel where the big battle action moments happen, I was wasting my time adding subtlety in the texture. And it only took a couple of times of really crappy speakers and in movie theaters or on TV to understand that I was totally wasting my time. And what my focus should be instead is to craft memorable themes, powerful themes, and really focus on the action moments and the thematic moments. So I was just wasting my time. So I began training myself, and this was a very willful, very focused process of learning to write memorable melodies, great themes. As a game composer, actually becoming a game composer has made me 1,000 times better composer, because this is what games teach us, to write memorable themes and also to craft a sound, an arrangement style that is a perfect fit for the game. And in that sense, I'm always grateful to be a game composer because I became a better composer. And this is the kind of skills I had to focus on, to be deliberate in the emotional gestures, to be deliberate in crafting the level of intensity, to be very careful to calibrate the intensity. So basically my journey from very imperfect sort of state to perfectionist, because we all are carrying card members, has been just to train myself to be a better composer, just to elevate my skills, to learn new skills, to practice. In between jobs, I'm always working on passion project, like a standalone artist album, that I challenge myself to do things I've never done on a job. And that's how I get bigger and better jobs, by training myself to do things I haven't done. So I would say basically my quest for perfection has been just the quest of becoming a better composer.
Austin says, it's easy to lose focus on what sort of perfectionism matters most. I would rather try and write the perfect melody recorded in a messy and rushed way than a squeaky clean recording of subpar writing, which pretty much falls in line with what everyone else feels here. So then, when you have those flaws, how do you let yourself be okay with that? How do you train yourself to move forward and finish something, even though there are things that may nag at us? So let's start here again.
So I worked in TV for 10 years on the Stargate series with Joel Goldsmith, who was my mentor and kind of who got me started. And that was a crash course in having to live with a certain amount of imperfection, because we would have to score a 30-minute episode per week, and this was fully polished, orchestral mock-ups, mixed and everything a week, and do that on two series at the same time. So it was a lot of work, a lot of writing. So we kind of had to find the quickest way to get the idea across, whether it be like a good melody that would really catch the ear, didn't spend a lot of time, polishing, having little subtle things like Penko was saying, little details that might get lost in the final broadcast anyways. So I kind of had my routine of, I know I'm going to, have a string pad and do a, melody on top of that, and I knew, add a little harp underneath it, and then I kind of knew ahead of time where I was going to draw the line. Once I get past adding, the harp accompaniment, and that's getting pretty specific, but that was kind of on that show specifically was my routine. Once I got past a certain point, I said, okay, now it's time to move on to the next thing. But really it's, how do you teach yourself that in a realistic way? You just kind of try to find the shortest way to get to the idea, to get to have something that will service the picture, service the game. So just kind of finding ways to get there quickly, efficiently, cut the corners and just get straight there. And if you're lucky enough to have a little extra time to polish it, then feel free to spend that.
Yeah, one of my mottos, and I have a few, is creativity is knowing which mistakes to keep.
Yeah.
So I relish mistakes because they're often like, oh my gosh, that was better than this thing I was thinking of. But you have to recognize that. You have to kind of go with it. So it kind of follows up on that idea of, that flaws can be a very important part of the process, and deciding when to iron things out and when to go, that was a cool idea, is really important. So it becomes about whether flaw conveys the emotion or, and the spirit that I'm after. If it does, then kind of work it into it. A little rough around the edges can be part of an aesthetic as well. But yeah, much like has been talked about here, nothing like a good deadline to kind of get you to realize what's important and what conveys the idea with picture, with game, Yeah.
I second what was said. I tweak things to death. I'm kind of a perfectionist. And when I orchestrate for Neil, I tweak the scores to death. He sees the final product. When I'm working on a game or a film, I have to keep my eye on a prize because I always have to think what is serving the picture best, what is serving the moment the best. We have a lot of conversations with our collaborators. We're all collaborative composers, which means what we do happens in a constant, ongoing dialogue with the people we work for. So, again, I would say just keeping my eye focused on the ultimate product, how the music is going to work with the game, with the film, is how but I do tweak, and I'm very merciless. I revise and throw away sections, and I can toss a whole entire piece and rewrite it. I'm pretty merciless.
Continuing my trend of pretending to be Austin here, I'm going to quote this directly because it's real good. One time my father, while playing Pictionary with my mother, was frustrated at her paralysis of how to draw what she saw on the card. He shouted, "Literally draw anything!" I think that holds for our work. Having something on paper that is flawed and needing revision is vastly easier to deal with than waiting until you have that perfect idea in your head. That can be paralyzing. So, speaking of paralysis, how do you escape writer's block?
Well, when I was younger, I used to say, I don't have the luxury of writer's block. I don't have the luxury of the time that it takes to be blocked. I was very, yeah. Now that I'm older, I have plenty of time to, I do have the luxury of writer's block from time to time. But what it is, I finally understood through the years that basically anytime you're blocked, it's really, you are making the mistake of thinking you're in control of your inspiration. And really, anytime the only control you have is getting out of the way of the idea, creating an environment which is conducive to that idea coming through, to inspiration visiting you. And then, just letting go of any expectations or trying to tell yourself it's going to be the best thing, it's going to be amazing, and we've won some awards through the years and gotten a certain amount of accolades. With every single accolade I've gotten in my career, it's gotten harder and harder because that just adds this external pressure, like, oh, now the next thing has got to be better, it's got to be better. Everything I do has to be perfect. And I'll sit there and I'll let that get to me sometimes. I'll let it get in my head that when I sit down, this is going to be the best thing ever. And I've been doing this for 20 years, and somehow I forget every single time that the only way I've gotten through it each time is by just forgetting everything, just writing something that's right in front of me, not thinking about where it's going, who's going to see it, how it's going to compare to stuff I've done before. So every once in a while I forget that and I get stuck. And then the best thing to do is just, if you can, take the night off, take the day off, just step away from it, let go, regroup, come back, and approach it from a different way. Like sometimes I'll just be sitting there, like kind of focusing on something around the same chord, the same melody, just doing this, and it's not working no matter how hard I try. I'll step back, come back the next day. Somehow, either that idea suddenly that sounds much better than I thought it did, or I just completely throw that idea away and start on something different, because whatever it is that you can't force it to happen. It has to happen organically, and that really has nothing to do with you. You have very little control over that happening. So letting go of control and just allowing it to happen is the best thing you can do.
Yes. Yeah, that's excellent. I So I have uptimes and downtimes. Sometimes I'm doing more sound design than music, or integration and music design than composition. And when I'm in those periods, it's not necessarily writer's block, but I want to continue making stuff. I miss that process. So I, from time to time, and I'm very inconsistent with it, but I have a music diary. And the concept is pretty simple. I get up in the morning, and pretty much the very first thing I do, get my coffee and come down to the studio, and I give myself 1 hour, maybe 1.5, and 2, if depending, but a set of time that I don't go over, that I write something that I'm going to post. Something that it's not like, because it's easy just to kind of, I'm going to play for an hour, and that doesn't do it for me. But I'll do something like, I'm going to post this on SoundCloud and make it available on Facebook, and it's usually like a 30 to 1 minute little piece of an idea, a chunk, but it has to have an arc to it, a musical idea. It has to be like a little poem of sorts. And what it does is it forces me, without having an artificial deadline, it's just my own deadline, to kind of just draw anything, right?
Yeah,
just
right.
draw anything. And usually I come down and I get a patch going, and then boom, that first idea is the best idea, and then I work with it until I have something, because I have an hour. And I find it really, really, really helpful. So, yeah.
I have to make a confession. After 29 years of being a professional composer, still the most intimidating thing is the blank template that you just open. It's completely blank, and you have to populate it with some meaningful music. So I do get blocked, and what I do is I immediately take myself out of that moment. I take a walk, then I listen to other music. Sometimes I play the piano. I'm very merciless, as I mentioned, with my material. Especially the initial process, like the initial composing is tough always. It just never becomes easy or mechanical. To return to the zone, I have to take a step back, exactly what Neil explained so beautifully. What I do is I read about the character. I kind of try to go back to the notes I took from collaborative meetings to kind of step back and take more of a bird's eye view over the whole situation, and this really helps me. Because I kind of go back to what we talked about. Maybe I would listen to a style guide or temp score that was given to me, but not to ape it, not to steal from it, just to kind of get inspired. I call this research. Research is very important, listening to music. I do a lot of demos for jobs, and I kind of have 2 days, so I don't have the luxury to be blocked. The first day is about composing the themes, and the second day is for programming, sequencing, mixing, orchestrating. But still, the most difficult phase of the composing is the beginning, when you kind of have a skeletal. Also, I don't work bit by bit. I throw a skeleton, I throw the whole gestalt of the piece, and I sometimes work on measures 10 through 20, which is the A theme, and then I skip to measures 50 through 60, which is the B theme, and I don't work step by step. And actually, being an interactive composer is really cool because you do that. So I kind of keep, and one thing I do, which is kind of more of a mental thing, sort of meditation thing, I always remind myself, I've done it in the past, I was able to deliver great music, I can do it again. Right now the sketch sounds like crap because it's just like a piano and strings, but I can get there, and I kind of visualize again the goal and sort of project myself at that end step when the music is beautifully arranged and mixed gorgeously by my mixing engineer, John Rod. And I push myself with sheer willpower to keep pushing through the crappy skeletal sketch. And this is what helps me kind of keeping, again, my eyesight on the end goal, which is usually beautiful music. I mean, yeah, so I have to push myself with my willpower. It's tough.
Austin says, I have never understood it related to the concept of writer's block. If you hone your technique and craft, you can put something on paper and then evaluate whether or not it's good. Plenty of times I've been uninspired and written garbage, but that didn't mean I was blocked. It just meant that it needed lots of revision or replacement. Accepting that what comes out is deeply flawed is part of that process and essential. So how do we use imperfections to our advantage? So using it to embrace or enhance the humanity, emotion, realism, etc. of a work. So let's start with Neil. I think he has a pretty good example here.
So another thing I learned while working on the Stargate series was I started working for Joel when I was, 23 or so, and came in there. I had a certain way of doing things. I used to, with MIDI, I used to draw in every single line, first violin, second violins, viola, cello. I used to draw in volume curves and everything, take my time doing it. It was like very, meticulous. And, I showed him, and I was really proud of this thing I had worked on. He said, listen, you're going to try to do that like working a TV schedule, you're going to kill yourself. So he said, here's what I do. Basically gets a volume pedal, and this is what I do now. And I have two pedals. The right pedal is a CC7 volume pedal. Left pedal is I have it assigned to CC4, which is generally, I'll map that to like a filter or expression or dynamic crossfade. And whenever a sample has a mod wheel thing, I'll often put it on the left pedal. That way, instead of drawing in the violins, violas, cello like that one at a time, I'll play everything with two hands, do the entire string section with a strings patch. That way I can write in the dynamics in real time for everything. And with the volume pedal on the right there, or on this side, it's the left, your left. It's basically I'm real-time mixing the level, so making sure that whatever I happen to be recording at that time, whether it's strings, kind of keep at a certain level. If I add a flute on top of that, I'm mixing in the level just so it balances. So by the time I'm done with the piece, it's already mixed, at least the MIDI-wise is. And the left, sorry, you're right, that's controller 4. The expression, I'm able to kind of add, just like you would with the mod wheel on a sample, kind of add that extra real-time dynamics. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, basically it's like you're having to independently move 2 feet at the same time, which is, I learned it from a guy who was a pilot and an organist. So he had,
Wow,
very
nice.
had the perfect use of independent use. So basically, this allows me to record it in real time. And then obviously I don't have the dexterity, the piano playing ability to have, to play every note in perfectly. So what I can do, once I have that overall dynamic, then I'll go in and I'll edit a little bit here and there. My volume curves, you can see there, they're pretty messy. But if for some reason, I need to fix one, I'll just go in and I'll draw it. It's a lot quicker than going in there and drawing. Plus, it's a lot more human. If you go in and draw these, like robotic lines up, lines down, it doesn't have that human kind of texture to it. That, and I don't quantize until I'm sending it out to Penka to orchestrate. I don't quantize it, except if it's a rhythmic thing like drums or spiccato strings, that kind of thing, I'll quantize it. But if it's like legato strings, I'll rarely quantize it because I just want to have a little more human of a sound. It does add an extra step at the end of going through and cleaning everything up and quantizing it before I can send it out, because if you don't quantize it, it'll, finale and notation programs will misinterpret rhythms and notes sometimes. So anyways, just kind of building in some human quality to the performance so the mock-up can sound as realistic as it can, because sometimes the mock-up is your final product.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I love that. I've often used my left hand for that stuff. I'm going to...
Oh, the other thing, too, is if you're, the two-pedal thing, you can totally, drink or eat a sandwich while you're
Yeah, right. And great sneakers, by the way. I like this. Thank you. Good sneakers. One of the things I do, in that I'm also work with synthesizers a fair bit, is I sometimes use techniques that create chaotic results, just to kind of get ideas kind of flowing. And one time I was working with my Jupiter 6, and it's an old 80s synthesizer, and I was working on Tron 2.0 game, and it just started freaking out and glitching, and I was like, oh my God, that sounds so cool, and I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get it back. So I turned on Pro Tools and just let it rip, and I just was touching and tweaking and making it kind of leap and just let it all go. And I had like an hour of this material, and it kind of became the foundational source because it was about Tron. You go into the computer and it starts deteriorating, and that became the deterioration aspect of the music bed and so forth. So
cool.
And it was entirely human because, well, I don't know, it wasn't human. It was actually an analog
entirely
synthesizer.
electronic.
Entirely electronic, but
entirely imperfect.
But it was a human decision to say, that is what I want to keep, and that's what I want to work with. So allowing a little bit of chaos into the whole process can really help that. It also makes you think outside of what you normally would kind of steer into in terms of your sonic palette and even your harmonic palette. Sometimes I make a mistake and go, I didn't mean to play that chord, and I go, ooh, but that suspension sounds pretty cool there. And you go, no, I won't keep it, or yes, I will keep it. So fumbling a little bit isn't all bad. It kind of brings up the notion of often we have, I know a topic that comes up a lot, and maybe we should do this as a specific topic, is what is it called? Imposter syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because it's related to perfectionism, right? We all think, I need to be like this. Right?
If I'm not perfect, I'm a fake, right?
Right, I'm fake. Now, there's one thing that, first of all, I didn't understand the term imposter syndrome when I first heard it, because when I was coming up, it was always, fake it until you make it, man. Fake it until you make it was the motto, and it's similar.
It's a very healthy motto.
But it's a healthier term, I think. Anyway, but what I've had to do is kind of keep in mind that, first of all, nobody gets over those fears when you're facing the blank page, right? None of us get over that. So the thing I try to remember is, okay, we're all human, and all humans, we have inherent worth and dignity, every one of us. Because I think it comes, and that includes yourself, right? So if you give yourself this inherent, like, yes, I'm worthwhile, and music is a form of communication, and I'm allowed to communicate with anybody. Therefore, I am worthy of creating music to communicate my ideas, right? End of story. So for me, that helps me get through anytime I face that sort of like, oh, am I at this level, So anyway, that's one point I wanted to make sure and bring up.
That's awesome. So moving a little bit along here, how do you quickly grasp new concepts and learn new skills, right? So we're nervous about making errors, but we have to learn new stuff. So like, always have more than one way to solve a problem. There are no dumb solutions, right? If it works, it works. Neil?
YouTube.
Yeah.
Honestly, when I started out, it was before the internet, so things, it was a little more difficult to find practical guides on how to do new things, new mixing techniques, or just about the fact that you go on YouTube, you can learn how to do pretty much anything. It's such a valuable resource, and I'm on it all the time, just trying to look up notational things. I'm communicating to Penka, like a certain bowings or things. I'll look it up and watch an actual player play it a certain way. Be like, yeah, that's right. And it's just there's so many resources like that. And of course, having people you can talk to, industry colleagues you really trust is great too.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's never losing your growth mindset. That's kind of an educational thing that we talk about with our children. Teach your child to have a growth mindset, and then they'll be able to learn anything. And we always feel like we get to this point in our careers when I know how to do what I do, but it's valuable to kind of always keep a growth mindset. I had an indie game where I just said, okay, this is my excuse to learn Unreal, and I just dove in. I have never worked with Unreal before, and I just dove in, and now I'm taking an Udemy course, which is one of those online courses to learn blueprints. Not because I want to be more technical, but because I want to be able to do certain things with my music in-game without necessarily bugging the game team and being able to offer that. So, and I love it. If I'm not learning something new, I feel like I'm kind of stagnating. So you just have to dig in and then hunt around, but it helps to have an end goal, like I want to do this with my music, right? If it's just like learning kind of a cold thing just to get a certification, it's more challenging, at least for me.
Stagnation is my biggest enemy. I hate stagnation. So as collaborative composers, we have to learn new skills for every single job. There's always a learning curve. And the moment when you chose to be a game composer, you commit to this path of learning, constant learning, always be learning, always be composing. Sometimes it's a genre I haven't scored in a while, and I kind of have to sort of refresh my memory, go back, listen to soundtracks, build up these skills again. Always it is finding the sound and style and arrangement that's going to be so unique and innovative and fresh, and it's going to really define that game and become part of the branding, because the score in gaming is used to brand that title and that product and becomes the sound signature. So I'm the kind of person who's always driven to do new things. I don't want to fall on my bag of tricks. I just mentioned a little bit earlier, every time between jobs, I do these passion projects, and it's always doing something I haven't done before. But I must say this, I come from classical background. I was classically trained, I'm a pianist. So for me, approaching any other style, I approach with utmost humility because I'm always misreading in a sense. Like if I'm doing a little bit of electronica or pulsing synths, I don't come from EDM, so I kind of impose my classical background on whatever else I'm borrowing, and that's the imperfection and the flawed approach, but I do it anyway, fearlessly and with like real thirst to learn. So, but one thing I want to do is always do different jobs and not be pigeonholed, although we always kind of get pigeonholed. And I like to say I'm a horror composer. I do a lot of science fiction and horror, but I also do, like for instance, last year I scored this wonderful VR game, world-building game, and the score was kind of like meditational, kind of Eastern. And if I don't challenge myself, my game collaborators always challenge me. They were like, okay, we don't want you to use orchestral harp, use a different harp. So I used some ethnic harp, and they said, we don't want you to use orchestral flute, use Eastern flute. So it's kind of a beautiful score, mostly with pulsing, delay guitar and synths, but it's completely outside of my comfort zone. And I was just so happy to do it because I stepped outside of my comfort zone. So I have the incredible sort of joy and honor to score a wide variety of projects, and every single one pushes me on a learning curve. I seek this out. I am happy when it happens, and I encourage all of you to really always be challenging yourself to do different things, because I detest stagnation.
Cool. Austin says, this simply comes down to opening your ears. Always be listening to new music and genres and letting yourself be flypaper to what the world has to teach. Plus, collaborating with different musicians with different styles from yourself can lead to entirely new ways of thinking. I find it's best to pursue that between the major deadlines, so when the iron strikes, you already have thought about it beforehand. Now, all these new things that we're trying to learn, all these new techniques, all these new styles, obviously, I mean, YouTube is great, but we can't always know everything. So how do you know when to ask for help?
So I have this thing I do called a creative brain trust, which basically every time there's like a new major step I'm attempting in my career, or a new project, something that's going well outside my comfort zone, I'll assemble a group of industry colleagues, friends, family members, people that I know specifically have a certain amount of expertise, having kind of treaded these waters before, and 3 or 4 or 5 people, and just kind of run some scenarios by them, discuss ideas with them, get their feedback. People I trust, people whose opinion I can take and either use it to confirm my own ideas about how I want to proceed, or possibly to give me some new ideas as well. I'm always asking Panka for advice on orchestration-related things, career-related things. My former boss, Joel Goldsmith, who passed away a few years ago, was somebody I used to, reach out to about, career things. And so the question is knowing when to ask for help. It's basically whenever you've reached a point where, you can't go forward with the information and knowledge you have, or if you don't feel comfortable enough taking that next step, and getting a little bit of support, will help you take that next step, then, there's no shame in asking for help. It's everyone, the game industry especially, everyone's so down to earth and friendly and happy to help. And, it's great to have the resources of the community. And, just, always ask.
Yeah, there are no dumb questions is my kind of motto. I'll jump into a forum and I think people say, oh, what's the perception going to be? It's like, no, I'm just going to go out there, and if I can't find it on my own, I will just do it. Much like Neil, I also have some trusted friends who I know will tell me the truth, and that's important. It's sort of like, you got friends like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. And I have one friend, Boyd Post, who I love to play stuff for, because it's like, well, I don't know. If I don't get the initial, yeah, I know it's not right. So even his initial reaction, I can just kind of like get a beat, like right away. It's like, So have somebody like that in your circle, and even just talking to somebody just to get the ideas going again helps your own flow, even if they don't give you the direct answer that you need. But there's communities are so rich now. It's and welcoming. I find the audio community for gaming is just remarkably welcoming. So I use all kinds of forums for that.
I encourage all my assistants and friends to build circles, tech buddies, listening circles, because I personally always send my music to trusted friends, like Guy and Neil said, for critical feedback, and I want them to be tough. And I do this all the time with every assignment, with every demo. I do have my listening and critiquing circle. It's all through email. This is the one aspect, just kind of getting critical feedback, fresh year. The other aspect is I do farm out. I'm very open about this because I'd like to acknowledge the people who add very special final touch to my arrangements, especially the kind of sound design or very elevated programming, which it's going to take me 2 days and it takes them 2 hours. So I do get, I essentially farm out certain things that I know other people, my friends, will do better than me. And that's how my music kind of gets that innovative polish or forward-looking polish, and I seek this out because I feel I'm a collaborative composer and I'm very open about including the ideas of other people, and that's an awesome thing.
So once we know what we're doing and we are creating the work we want to make and we have the ideas in hand and we aren't blocked with, with writer's block or imposter syndrome and we're doing a thing, how do you not spiral into making improvements into your work? You've done the piece, you've written it. Are you really sure you need to adjust that EQ again? Is it good enough? So let's turn this. This is one of my fun things. It's like, as a perfectionist, gotta just make sure it's right. Is it right? Send it to someone. What do they think, etc. So, Neil.
Till when you're working for a client and you have a deadline, it's really easy.
Yeah.
You just
That's right.
you run out of time and you're done. I work right up until the last second. Every last second I can grab to perfect it, I do, and the time runs out and I hand it off and I'm done. Of course, there's things I hear that I did years ago. I'm like, I still wish I could go back and change that, But how do you avoid that on indie games that you might have a little more control over? You might be the person deciding when it's good enough. It's again just about running out of time, and I think also too is getting it to a certain point where you start to kind of lose momentum and start to feel like it's a chore, and you can feel that moment where you're not really progressing. Step back and come back to it a week later or some amount of time later. Listen to it again on fresh ears. You're going to see it from a whole different perspective, and then you can decide whether it really needs that extra EQ tweak.
Neil, I wanted to tell the audience how many people are giving you feedback on the cinematics, just as if you're at liberty to discuss how many people you're getting feedback from on your cinematics.
Your Blizzard cinematics?
Oh, you're asking me how many?
How many people are giving you feedback, just as a...
Well, in the case of the Blizzard cinematics, there's a lot of people involved in giving feedback, but it all channels through a director. That director takes everyone, like there's a music director, there are producers, there's game team, there are department heads. A lot of people will kind of listen and have feedback. They all give that to the director, which is this great thing about Blizzard. Rather than have pages of notes coming from different people, conflicting things, because I've experienced that working on films where you have different things. But in the case of Blizzard, they director takes all this feedback and he decides of everything everyone's suggesting, which of those things he feels strongest about. And basically the idea is to have a unified vision of what they're going for. So I only really deal with other people. I'll hear other people's feedback, but it's the one director will kind of say, be the running point on that.
Wow, that's a mature company. I mean, right? Wow, and that's a good lesson you could take to another company, right? Say, or hey, audio director, could you be the funnel for this stuff? Because that's just not as common as it should be. So that's fantastic. Deadlines are the thing that I've always relied on, and it's remarkable. And the air will fill up to fill the deadline. So it's imposed on you. It's always tougher to impose your own deadlines, and that's what I struggle with. And I'm doing this personal project that I've been working on for years, because it's like this passion thing, and I'm having to impose my own deadlines. And it's also helpful to bring in someone else to say, okay, you set this schedule, you can keep to it. So I have some friends who are going to help me keep to my own schedule and be outside reminders, because otherwise, and also, doing my little music diary is also helpful too, to kind of, yes, this is a self-imposed deadline. I can do this and pretend like it's another me saying, you're done, So, yeah.
I obsess pretty much over the notes, but I don't obsess over EQing some drum 3 zillion times. I kind of work pretty quickly and then get feedback. I probably would say once I get the feedback from everybody who's going to give me feedback, then I do it and I'm done. But I want to say one thing. We do get incongruent feedback, and one of our big jobs is to learn how to reconcile different opinions. And this is part of a job. This is part of being a collaborative composer. And that's one skill that I encourage all of you to develop, because you'll have to reconcile, different opinions, and ultimately always, again, keep what's the best for the game, what's the best for the music, and ultimately what's the best for the gaming experience. And that's how you have to think about it. You're going to hear some really amazing feedback. You're going to hear some pretty idiotic feedback, and you have to be able to really filter through all the feedback and learn to implement. And it's not an easy skill. I encourage you to practice it.
All right, we're almost there. All right, so when does absolute perfection really count? All right, we know how to let things go. When does absolute perfection count? When do we have to be perfect, for real, this time?
When it comes to score prep, getting ready for a session, or final delivery, perfection is absolutely essential. No mistakes whatsoever, because you're dealing with, an orchestra, you're dealing with thousands and thousands of dollars that are being spent. Every minute counts. So, making triple checking everything, making sure that, your sample rate is correct, your click track lines up with the bars, making sure that you have, at the beginning of the project, ask the client, for all the specs, exactly what the loudness needs to be, what the sample rate, the delivery format, naming schemes, everything needs to be, clearly defined from the beginning, and stay on top of that. And for this reason, I never let, some people have assistants that take over their prep, their sessions. I really should do that. I really should have someone helping with that, but I can't let that go, because early on in my career, I delivered a score for a film. It's supposed to be a 5/1 delivery. I delivered it in mono. Because I did it, at someone else's. I was really young. I was at someone else's studio that I didn't really know, and I somehow routed everything. So it was 5 or 6 channels of all the exact same thing, and they called from the stage and like, this is in mono, and I'm like, it was just devastating. So from that point on, never made another mistake again, which is not true, but. But man, I really, really try every time, because I hate. So it's very rare that I'll make a mistake, and when I do, it's not because I didn't, check it 3 or 4 times, and you just got to be. That's the one part of the process you can't mess up.
Yeah, wow, that's so true. That's a good story. I love it. Everybody has a moment like that is a big, like, oh crap, that I can't ever let that happen again. One of the reasons I obsess over what I'm calling music design and integration is because you can be perfect at every step of the way. You can have the most gorgeous orchestral recordings and even mock-ups or whatever kind of score it is. And if it's not working well in the game, first of all, if working is one thing. If there are glitches in how it's playing back in the game, or it just bumps a crossfade that has a click in it and a big pop, you're out of the moment, and all that awesome work it's almost for naught. Because that's the last 10 yards. That's the last little bit. So I obsess and make sure that what is coming out of the gaming speakers is absolutely perfect, but with the score that's there, and it's not only how it's integrated, but that it's really fine-tuned. It's the mixing stage. It's where just putting all the detail and crispness of how it's going to sound to the user. and how it's balanced. So for me, that's the perfection that I can't let go of.
I would encourage all of you to have one really humiliating failure early on, on a really low level, like low stress job, like fail utterly. When I was doing television films for the Sci-Fi Channel, there's this one science fiction movie, I had worked so hard, 17, 18-hour days, 3 hours of sleep for like 6 weeks, 5 weeks. And at the dub stage, the guy who was the dubbing engineer is like, just go away, I'll just do the dubbing on my own. But the length of the main title always changed, so I went to the actual final mixing session, and and the score was shifted by a couple of seconds. So every single hit, and of course it was a science fiction film, so there are a lot of hits. So you have a really quiet moment, and there's this gigantic zoom, hit I composed. I had to beg for them to take maybe 1 hour to kind of shift the entire score so it really syncs. And it was humiliating, but I fixed it at the very last possible moment before they printed the dub. And I learned from this point on to be really hands-on when it comes to the deliverables, because the deliverables are the singularly most important aspect of what we do as composers. So be on top of your deliverables. That's one thing that you cannot have any mistakes, and it's just, you make a mistake, you don't get hired again. That's how it is. They must be perfect, absolutely flawless. So another thing, learning to compose interactive music was a real learning curve for me because I came from linear background, and what I understood, and this is what I say always to everybody, I don't compose a single note of music before I have had all these conversations. I don't implement, always somebody else will have to implement my music. I have to ask them how it's going to be. I have to see game mechanics, I have to see the map. So I do a lot of asking and talking, and I set my methodology for composing before I write the first note, because I need to know how I'm going to compose this game score so it really matches the game and fits the gameplay. And so I do a lot of kind of thinking. I'm a very sort of deliberate, thoughtful composer, and I do all the preemptive strikes I can do possibly to save myself from humiliation and trouble down the line, because it only takes once to really make a mistake, and you kind of know you can't make mistakes. You have to be totally perfect when it comes to deliverables, to understanding how the score will be implemented, and don't ever be afraid to ask questions. I do ask a lot of questions, and these are ongoing conversations. We prototype a lot. I'm pretty fast, but I'm not also super fast. I'm not nearly as fast as Neil or Guy, but setting my own process is very important for me, and I do this in a very deliberate way.
So, final question. Kind of a bonus round here. How do you determine when good enough is actually good enough? So, what are your yardsticks for measuring this?
Well, the thing is, it's our job to facilitate the vision of the person that's hiring us to make the music in the first place, the client. So ultimately, it's up to them to tell us if this is good enough. So there have been times where I've written things that I thought were not great, not my best work, that the client has loved and been like, oh, that was the best thing ever. And there's times where I wrote things that I spent weeks on, thought it was the best thing ever, and happened on a film, happened once. I wrote the best love theme I've ever written. It was amazing. Guy fired me the next day because he said, oh, it's not right for this film, and you never know. So ultimately, it doesn't matter what you think is perfect, it matters what the client thinks is perfect. So, if you're in a position and if you're not the one that's actually, overseeing the final thing, if you're making it for somebody, which is almost always how it is, then it's ultimately up to them.
Yeah, clients, and the other aspect is the audience. Like, when, somebody, and this doesn't happen that often to me, but somebody on the game floor saw my name tag and said, oh, he pointed out a game I did in literally 20 plus years ago and gave me a big hug, and I was like, okay, you had an effect, and that game, not just the music, but that game had a big impact on him. That's when it's really worth it, and I know that it was good enough, right? Because the people experiencing it meant something to them as a whole, and then he was interested enough to find out more about it and so forth. But yeah, it's about the gamer, it's about the listener for me.
The client is the king. I absolutely always deliver what they want. Whatever they want, I will deliver. I never question feedback. If they want something, yes, yeah, totally, I'll do it. Of course, I have to filter through that feedback, whatever, but still approach it intelligently. But the answer is always yes. I never ever argue with clients. If they want something, if they want the music more purple, okay, I will make the music more purple. I can do that. So I do get a lot of requests for revisions. Sometimes I have to decide to maybe rewrite the whole cue or the whole theme. That happens. That happened on the Mummy game. I rewrote the score twice because the first set of directions kind of led me down a wrong path. So now I'll teach you a trick. So the deliverables are exactly what the client wants. However, on the soundtrack, which often it's just on SoundCloud, some kind of link, or on the soundtrack, I pick my favorite version, and it may not be what went to the final, to the dub stage. So that's kind of where I have a little bit more control, what I want to present to future clients. So I kind of pick my favorite. And nobody needs to know that I did that, but I do that because when the music is listened out of context and people just check it out for future jobs, I want them to hear what I consider my best version, which may or may not be what went into the implementation.
So Austin, like the true perfectionist that he is, says, for me, good enough is never good enough. But deadlines and the pragmatics of life, like everyone else here has said, demand when the cutoff must be called. But for me, saying good enough is proof that it's not, even if it must be. So, on that interesting note, thank you all very much for coming today. We have a few minutes for questions, but let's give our panelists a round of applause. If we have questions, can you line up behind that microphone right there? All right, let us know who the question's for. If it's for the whole panel, go right ahead. Sir, take us away.
At what point do you know that your track is good enough to hire musicians?
To what?
To hire musicians. At what point do you know that your track is good enough to hire musicians? Bring them in on it.
When you have the notes that the musicians can play. Sorry.
No, so if you're mocking up a track and you're maybe not sure that the arrangement is, good enough, or that the pieces that you're writing for your musicians isn't good enough. I mean, when do you decide?
I never feel like what I'm writing is good enough for the musicians to play it that I get to work with on a regular basis.
Okay.
I'm always, even at the last minute, I'm like trying to find some way to make it more interesting and, not just be, because, these are people that are playing in ballets and, playing some of the most amazing classical music in the world. I'm sitting there and, throwing some whole notes at them and stuff. So how do you know when, again, it's just that the deadline comes up, but you're lucky enough to have your musicians hired. But yeah, you pretty much just set a deadline, book a session, and then you work right up to the last second, get it as good as you can, and then once the musician comes, you also can trust their input and allow them to kind of bring their own expertise. If it's like, a soloist, you can have them improv and kind of add their own kind of interpretation and help them, allow them to help you make it better.
Cool, thank you.
Sir?
Hello. Rather than asking a question, I wanted to comment on this last question, which I thought was very important. This is too low. Okay. So, it's very important to, I wanted to comment on that. Okay, so it's important to really develop your personal taste to dictate you when good enough is really good enough, because you have to establish it. Like this is your compass that will take you through your career, like very fast. If you're good enough, is like I call it the tolerance for crap in your own music, right? And you gotta have this tolerance pretty way up there, not to let crappy music through this. And so I'm not sure if this is.
It's called a crap gate, right?
Huh?
You have a gate for the crap.
Yeah, this. Oh my God, is this messy what I'm talking about, or is it like this is what I'm saying is it's really important to establish this, so that it's a vehicle that will take you through your career path.
Listen to a lot of music. I'm married to a music editor. Every morning for the 15 years of our marriage, he plays one soundtrack at 6:45 a.m. So I've been, no, this is for reals. I listen to one commercial, studio-released soundtrack, whether it's a film or a game or TV show, every day of my life, and I kind of wake up every morning to music sort of already playing. I encourage all my assistants and all my friends to continuously listen to obviously commercially produced soundtracks. Check out Guy's music, check out John's music, check out all of Neil's music. It's tremendous.
To develop your taste.
And to develop your taste, to develop your ear. Your ear has to be really sensitized to high quality, flaws, and to listen to music. That's how you'll do it.
Cool. I think we have oh, sorry, did you?
No, go ahead.
One more question real quick.
All right. Oh, this is not going to be quick, guys. Come on. So I've been pouting on this for a while, and I'm just curious how each one of you deal with, especially Penka, I know, because you have a classical piano background. And so you grew up playing with so much rubato all the time, but when you do film, when you do games, it's so much easier just to go to a click and forget the human feel of the rubato, inner phrase, ends of phrases. It's not just, not just the end of an entire piece that retards. It's like the human feel for the whole thing. And I know sometimes that's just hard to do from the beginning and keep it from the beginning of your concept all the way through to end production. Just wonder how each of you quickly deal with rubato.
But then rock music is 4 on the floor, and it's really steady. So if the music is
Oh
kind
yeah,
of
but I'm talking about the other half of the music.
I program, I write by hand retardando. I actually really dislike programming retardandos because they're time-consuming, but you have to kind of really, in slow music, I do build them into the sequencer, and I'm very thoughtful about that. So it really depends. If the music is more classically based, I would just write the retardandos by pencil, the pencil tool. I work in Digital Performer. So it's time-consuming, I do it. But if it's more commercial music, like a kind of electronica influence, then it's steady beat.
Yeah, you can also perform something in without a click, right? Just
Sure.
just leave it at 120 and just perform it in. And there's ways to kind of tap in where you want the tempos to kind of
I know,
match.
and that's my point is that the technology makes that like an extra hard step, but
Maybe you need the
I
foot
tend to
pedal.
want to do that, but I
Get
wish
your-
it was easier for
like-
all of us musicians.
Couldn't you move the foot pedal as you go? I don't know, so that you actually, it's a tempo, I don't know.
No, I never play live because then it takes me forever. No, I usually gauge the tempo and then gauge the overall tempo and then write in by hand the retards. I never just kind of play randomly because it takes me forever to line up the beats and I get very impatient.
As far as I know, the only way to do it, from a technological perspective, where you're mapping it out ahead of time for musicians, is to do it manually. I actually, the songwriter Mark Shaman, one time I was interning with him, and he had a session with Bette Midler where the two of them just went in the studio, and she sang the song, and he just, noodled along on the piano. Then he handed it to me and said, "Okay, now make a click track go because we're going to record strings to that."
Right.
And I was just starting out. I was like, I have no idea, but I learned how to do it. It's really, painstaking. It's really like a pain to do. I don't know any other way to do it.
Yeah.
But the other way too is you write it into the score and you have a click track, and then you get to the session, pull the click out, and say, okay, now do a take that's completely rubato, and then you edit it in later. Do your own, just have it, have the conductor just do a, totally rubato free take on it, and then edit that in.
Okay, thanks.
Good to see Marty.
Thank you. Do we have to go, or can we take one more? Yay, sir.
Is it okay? So I think one of the most important things to find any mistakes or fry is monitor speaker, I think. And what is the most reliable situation to find out some mistakes or fry? What is the most reliable monitoring situation for you?
So what is the most reliable technique to find
Technique, the different kind of monitor speaker or just a situation so you can realize what is right, what is wrong. So some people are trying to find this kind of whole situation is the best monitoring
I don't think there's
situation.
a best, but most of us have near-field monitors that are pretty clinical. I mean, they're both, so you might have FARs that kind of sound like more what it might sound like in a theater, but you also have near-fields so you can really hear detail and what each note is kind of doing and if it's in tune and all that. So you have this almost overly precise setup, right? But then you always, as Pink was saying, you got too detailed, right, at one point. So it's really good to listen on what, pretty close, or a range of what listeners are going to listen back on, be it a sound bar, which is really common now. I have one of those. Computer speakers, you know, iPhone speaker, whatever it is, so that you're listening back on the system that is going to be heard in. Yeah.
And listen back on something you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
I have, Mackie HR828s. They're not the best speakers. I've been wanting to upgrade them for years, but I'm so used to them that I've gone to other studios and had, the 120,000 BNC speakers and it sounds amazing, and I get it home and listen to my speakers and it doesn't sound as good.
Yeah.
I know if it sounds good on my speakers at home, it'll sound good on the best speakers, the crappy speakers, because I know those speakers. So it's just important to be familiar with what you're listening on.
The best tip that my recording engineer, John Rowell, gives is work on your professional speakers, which are near field, but then once you do the final mix or definitely play the music on the crappiest possible speakers you can find. In your car, one thing I do, which is kind of weird, I play the music in my studio, but I go to the kitchen, and I kind of listen from really far away. It's just a weird thing. I kind of play the music and walk away from the room. I always listen in the car, and my car has like totally Toyota crappy speakers. So really, just because, I've been in situations where people will play music on earbuds with other music around them or noise, and your music has to stand on it. This is why the subtlety really gets lost if you just listen to music on a bad system. But check it out, and at least 3 sets in on your car, your crappy speakers, your awesome speakers, and somebody else's house. Test it. Do a lot of testing.
Also, when you're mixing, listen at a low volume so you can hear the balance of everything. It's easy to turn it way up and it sounds great and everything, but you're not really able to focus on the balance between everything that way.
That is all we have time for. Thank you all so much for coming.